Hi. So I'm going to read one of my favorite stories from The Adventures of Frog and Toad. This one is called The Story, and like we mentioned before, especially if you've been in my story time, these books are written in the 1970s. I think the first one was written in 1970, and then in 72, and then in 79. We would actually call these books classics because more than one generation loved them, and they've been passed down, and now I read them when I was a kid, and now we're reading them to you guys. So it's the classic, The Story, A Frog and Toad Story. There's the picture. One day in summer, Frog was not feeling well. Toad said, "Frog, you're looking quite green." "But I always look green," said Frog. "I'm a frog." "Today you look very green, even for a frog," said Toad. "Get into my bed and rest." Toad made Frog a cup of hot tea. Frog drank the tea, and then he said, "Tell me a story while I am resting." "All right," said Toad. "Let me think of a story to tell you." Toad thought and thought, but he could not think of a story to tell Frog. There he's thinking and thinking. "I will go on the front porch and walk up and down," said Toad. "Perhaps that will help me think of a story." Toad walked up and down on the porch for a long time, but he could not think of a story to tell Frog. He's just walking back and forth, back and forth. Then Toad went into the house and stood on his head. "Why are you standing on your head?" asked Frog. "I hope that if I stand on my head, it will help me to think of a story," said Toad. Toad stood on his head for a long time, but he could not think of a story to tell Frog. Look at Frog. He's like, "Dude, why are you standing on your head?" And there he is, standing on his head for a long time. Then Toad poured a glass of water over his head. "Why are you pouring water over your head?" asked Frog. "I hope that if I pour water over my head, it will help me to think of a story," said Toad. Toad poured many glasses of water over his head, but he could not think of a story to tell Frog. Oh my goodness. Just pouring water over his head. Then Toad began to bang his head against the wall. "Why are you banging your head against the wall?" asked Frog. "I hope that if I bang my head against the wall hard enough, it will help me to think of a story." "Well, I'm feeling much better now, Toad," said Frog. "I do not think I need a story anymore." "Then you get out of bed and let me get into it," said Toad, "because now I feel terrible." Frog said, "Would you like me to tell you a story, Toad?" "Yes," said Toad, "if you know one." Look at him banging his head on the wall. Of course, he's starting to feel dizzy. And now I think Frog is like, "Buddy, look, I'm okay. You're going to hurt yourself. Let me get out of bed. You get in bed." So here's the story that Frog tells his crazy old friend, Toad. "Once upon a time," said Frog, "there were two good friends, a frog and a toad. The frog was not feeling well, and he asked his friend the toad to tell him a story. The toad could not think of a story, so he walked up and down on the porch, but could not think of a story. The toad stood on his head, but he could not think of a story. He poured water over his head, but he could not think of a story. He banged his head against the wall and still could not think of a story. Then the toad did not feel so well, and the frog was feeling better. So the toad went to bed, and the frog got up and told him a story. The end." "How was that, Toad?" asked Frog. The toad did not answer because he had fallen asleep. And there he is, snoring away. Thank you for listening to a Frog and Toad story with me. And hopefully you guys are all happy and healthy.